I am going to do something very interesting today. I'm going to call it Drive by Audit. So what I'm going to do is do an engineer's audit of the exterior panels and exterior quality in terms of alignment and paint finish of every single Toyota car that I see here in display. And maybe I'll get to the Lexus one as well. As you guys know, I'm an automotive engineer by background. So what I'm going to do is do this in a live stream style and check the panel alignment of all these cars and see if they are well made based on my expectation. And I'm going to try to do as many as I can here at the Toyota booth at the Canadian Auto Show in Toronto. So let's start with the Sequoia, which I almost bought but decided not to do that. But let's take a look at this one made in Texas. And right off the bat, I hope this is not the final production model because there's something wrong with the hood alignment against the front fender. It's actually misaligned here. You can tell both in terms of a finishing job here, but also this thing is pushed in quite a bit. I think this is something wrong with this particular hood. Maybe for the auto show they were doing something. This cannot be right. This will not pass the inspection at the Texas factory. And around the bend here though, still same issue as my Tundra. It gets narrow here and it gets wider. It's not too bad here, but definitely something is wrong with this hood, which is a little sunken in basically. Let's take a look at the other side to see if the problem is still on this side as well. Actually, this side is looks okay. So maybe it is, once again, some kind of a defect caused by transportation, maybe to the show. But this is a bit of a surprise here. And alignment here is actually pretty good. The gap is about 3.8 millimeters, so pretty more normal for this type of car. In terms of front to the rear door, the alignment is pretty good, but the gap is a bit wider than what I expect. And also here between the rear door and the rear fender. And once again, this one is not too good. You can see a bit of a defect here in terms of both the angle and the stamping piece. And this is way too wide. So perhaps maybe this is an early production model. I don't think this is going to be the final production. I'll be shocked if that was the case. Not too bad here actually, and not too bad here. It's pretty normal and average. Paint job looks pretty good though. Very shiny and glossy. A little bit of orange peel along here, which is always the case with Toyota models. They tend to have more orange peel than some other brands. But overall, I'm not quite sure about this particular Sequoia. This might be an early production, I think. Maybe it's not the final production model. Now let's go and check out the other models. Okay, so now I am at the Tundra TRD Pro. This is exactly what I had. I just sold it literally about a month ago or so. Anyway, let's take a quick look because I'm very familiar with this one. There was always a bit of a body fit and finish issue, but this one looks a little bit better. It looks about 3.5 millimeters, so better than the Tundra I had. No problem with the decals. If you guys recall, mine had this D upside down. Obviously, that was probably one off, and they fixed that right away. And the panel alignment here is not bad. This one is a bit higher than this one though, so I'm not sure about that one. I still think it's a little bit better than my Tundra because this looks a little bit narrower. And what about front door to the back door? That looks perfect. And the back door to the end also looks good, although the gap is a little bit wider than I would like to see. Same in the Sequoia. And then the actual paint job is very good. It's always been very good. Even in my Tundra, I had no issue with the paint job. Once again, always a little bit of orange peel throughout here for most Toyota cars in the light paint. And then what about some of those problems I had with my cars, like the weather stripping here? Still, there's a gap. It's not a defect actually, it's just the way it was designed. But this one sometimes lift up, and this one looks okay on this particular showroom Tundra. And then we had a problem with this plastic piece here that was also sticking out on mine, but they obviously fixed that. In fact, this whole part looks different now. It's being replaced by a newer part that seems to fit properly and looks more integrated into the this front corner here. So I'm glad they got that sorted out. And I had a bit of a bubble in this B pillar, but this one looks pretty good. I never really liked this kind of a blacked out pillars, but anyhow, design wise, I'm not crazy about, but in terms of quality, it looks good. So that's the Tundra. Let's keep on going and see if I can look at some other one. Let's look at the Tacoma. So this is another Tundra. Let's see if it's much better. This is the iForce Max. This is the capstone, the most expensive, and unfortunately still a little bit of issue here. This is sticking out too much. You can see that, and it's very narrow here, and it gets wider, you can tell. So and same thing here, it gets narrow and wider. This part is really hard to get it right because of the curvature. So engineering wise, it wasn't a good decision to have such a big curvature here and then come down here. That was a bad design in terms of manufacturability, and as a result they can never get this quite right, but I guess most people never notice that. Now let's take a look at the Tacoma, which is now built in Mexico. Well, it's been built in Mexico for a while, but they stopped producing Tacomas in the Texas factory and moved everything over. So there are two Mexican factories that's producing Tacoma. I've owned a 2018, a 2019, and a 2020 Tacoma TRD Pro in Lunar Rock, so I'm very familiar with it. In many ways, I miss the Tacoma because it's the right size, and I think enjoy the ownership of the Tacoma more so than the Tundra, just because it's almost impossible to park that thing in tight parking space. But let's take a look at the quality, because the one I owned was the last one they built in Texas in the US, and this one is definitely built in Mexico. So look at the gap here in terms of the front fender to the front hood, and actually it's pretty good. That gap is about 4 millimeter, but it's very level and in a proper alignment. Little bit off here, but that's totally acceptable in terms of my expectation. About 4 millimeter here, and very, very well aligned. Same thing here. Well, let me see, make sure the door is closed properly. No, this one's a bit off. This side is maybe like 0.2 or 3 millimeter higher than this side. This one can be adjusted by a dealership, but it is definitely a little bit off. And the rear doors are actually very good. The only issue with the rear door, always sounds a little bit tinny, but otherwise it's pretty well done. The gap is about 3.5 millimeters, so really good quality. And then taking a look here, this part is not as good, but you can tell there's a bit of a defect here. Let me open the back. That is an actual paint defect, this little blob here, because we don't have them on this side. This is perfect here, but not perfect here. So they somehow missed that. So that was a bit surprising. But in terms of the gap, it's actually quite good. Now let's take a look at the paint job on this side. This is just a basic white paint. So it's pretty clean, and actually a little bit less orange peel than in Tundra. But you don't get too much gloss because this is just a basic paint work. But it's totally fine, nothing wrong with it. Very uniform and consistent. And I don't have my paint thickness gauge here to measure the total amount of paint thickness, so I can't tell you if it's a thicker paint or thinner paint, but the paint matching also looks pretty good between the plastic and the metal. Okay, now let's go and take a look at the 4Runner, which is built in Japan still. And this is one of the very first solar octane car I've seen in real life, because most of the solar octane one that media has previewed were actually wrapped. But this one is the actual painted solar octane color. Really, honestly, looks more orange than red orange. But anyhow, this is built in Tahara factory, and therefore you can tell right away compared to the Tacoma or the Tundra, the quality is very different. Look at the gap. It's about 3.2 millimeters, very flush and almost perfect paint job. You get a little bit of roundness here, but that's normal. But the edges are lining up perfectly here. If you look at the side panels here also, absolutely no issue. This is way narrower than those guys over there, you can tell. This is about 3 millimeter, maybe even 2.9. I can't use the gauge here just because I don't want to damage the vehicles by accident. Also same, about 2.9, 2.8 here, and same, or even better here, 2.7 millimeters. So the gaps are consistently better than any of the North American made ones back there. And the paint job, fantastic. Look at that. Tahara is the same factory where many of the Lexus are built, and this 4Runner goes through the exact same paint process and the paint line as Lexus model. So you can tell that the paint job is fantastic, very consistent, a lot less orange peel than the North American built ones, and you can tell right away that the gloss and the clear coat absolutely uniform and almost perfect. So you know what? If you're wondering if the Japan-made body-on-frame trucks are better, right now, based on my observation here at the auto show, and based on my experience with owning the 4Runner many times, actually, I've owned about 7 different ones. Definitely the Tahara-built, Japan-built 4Runner is clearly one of the best built vehicles in the entire world. Now let's take a look at the Highlander. This is not the Grand Highlander. I've done a separate video on the Grand Highlander quality, so take a look at that. But let's take a look at the Highlander to see if this Indiana-built, US-built ones are actually quite well built. So in terms of the body fit and alignment, so they have a slightly different design. The hood actually ends here, so there's a corner here. They've cleverly kind of covered it up with a rubber strip, but looks pretty good into the lineup. And you know what? The hood is not bad, but the gap is wide. This is over 4 millimeters. 4 millimeter is kind of standard that we want to live by. 3 millimeter is like benchmark for Lexus, but usually you want it between 3 to 3.5. This is 4.1 millimeter, probably my guess. So it's a bit wider than I would like to see. Not too bad here. This is about the same as Tacoma and Tundra over here. So about 4 millimeter as well, but nicely aligned. And this one is about 3 millimeters, so that's good. And this one is actually very good, about 3.1 millimeter or so. But the back end is a problem. It's the same thing on my Highlander, which is a 2020. This is way too wide. This is like 5.5 millimeter. To be honest, I think it's a design flaw because it's always been this way. A little bit better on this side, but this is just way too wide, and it's a bit of an eyesore. So I'm surprised by that. But the paint job looks pretty good though. Very nice gloss, very consistent. Still a little bit more orange peel. You can tell orange peel compared to 4Runner, for example. So just the North American paint process, you tend to get more orange peel. It just basically looks like a texture of an orange. And you can tell the gloss isn't quite as good as, let's say, Tundra, but about the same as a Tacoma. So paint work coming out of the Indiana plant has always been a bit of a weak spot in my perspective. It might be a cost reduction thing, but the gloss isn't amazing. But based on my quality check of the Grand Highlander way over there, that one seems to be better built. But time will tell. Now let's move on to, there's too many people here, so I'm going to move on to maybe the RAV4 here and take a quick look at the Canadian built one. So here's a RAV4. This is the hybrid, and this one is built in Canada. It's always been pretty well built, and you know what? You can tell that the gap is very consistent, about 3.5 millimeter, and no issue with alignment here. This one is a little bit higher than this side, but this is by design. It's a kind of clamshell design. And look at that. It's so good. You know what? I would say it's pretty close to the one that's built in Japan. If you saw my video about the Japan versus Canadian built RAV4, then you'll know what I mean. If you haven't seen it, please take a look at that video. But this is about 3 millimeters. Same here, about 3.2. And this is back to 3 millimeters. This is slightly off, this side compared to that side. But the paint job is actually very, very good coming out of the Ontario factory. Once again, more orange peel here, but very consistent and very uniform. So the Canadian built RAV4 is actually one of the best built SUV, especially if you compare it to the competitors. So now we've done the Sequoia, the Tundra, the Tacoma, the Highlander, and the RAV4. Let's take a little walk down this way. If you haven't seen my video that I did on the Grand Highlander, in terms of the quality, please take a look at that. Let me take a quick look at some of the Japanese built one here, including the GR86. Now don't forget, this one is built in a Subaru factory, not at a Toyota factory. But Subaru is 20% owned by Toyota now, so they're essentially one of the same company, more or less anyway. But the quality of Subaru cars are actually excellent in terms of exterior, and which is true for this GR86. Look at the alignment. Wow, perfect alignment. gap is consistent at about 3.2 millimeters, and even the edges are perfectly lined up. And same thing between the front fender and the front door, about 3 millimeters. Wow, this one is really well built. Absolutely no issue whatsoever with any of the alignment. Just perfect. You can't get much better than this on a very affordable car, and yet the quality is so perfect. Look at the paint job, also really uniform, very consistent paint. It's not super glossy clear coat, but this paint job is fantastic in terms of how it looks on the GR86. Now it is getting a bit louder here, so I'm going to try to move over to other cars. There's people over there, so I'm not going to go, or maybe I will try to quickly go over here. For GR Corolla, I've done a quality check on this before, but this is a production car. And this is built in a special section in Motomaji factory called the Gazoo Racing factory. And look at that, amazing quality. About 3 millimeter gap, and almost perfect. It almost looks like there's no gap. It's so well made. And same thing here between the fenders and the doors. That's less than 3. That's like 2.8 millimeter. That's about 2.9 millimeter. And this is also 2.9. So this panel alignment is better than many cars costing $100,000. This thing is as well built as a Lexus model in terms of the exterior quality. And the paint job is also very consistent. There's less orange peel, which seems to be always the case with cars built in Japan. Japanese people don't like the orange peel, so they try to minimize it. But the clear coat and the gloss is almost perfect. Really well built on this GR Corolla. The back end is always a little bit wider here, but that's pretty normal. What about the Supra here, just very briefly? I've owned a Supra before, and it was actually quite reliable, the one I owned. But this one, let's take a look. It's built in Austria by a Canadian company called Magma. It's part of a affiliation with not just with Toyota, but BMW and many other cars are built there. It's basically a contract manufacturing company. The quality has always been quite good, but you can tell right away this is a little bit off. This side's higher than that side, so a little bit off. Not too bad. It's within the spec anyway. And the gap here is pretty wide. That's like 4.1 millimeter. I don't know. I wouldn't have accepted that from a Toyota standard. But the rest of the body is pretty good, and the paint job is really, really good. It's absolutely excellent because the gloss is perfect. The clear coat is really good and absolutely well made. So let's keep on looking through other models here. Here's a Camry. This is built in Kentucky. Let's take a look from the front to the back and see how it is. This is 23 Camry Hybrid. And the quality is actually very good here in the front. Pretty consistent actually, better than Tundra or Sequoia. Kentucky has been around for a very long time, so no question that the quality is where it is. And the gap, look at that, that's actually excellent. That's a Lexus standard. That's about 3 millimeter here. Even less than 3, 2.9 millimeter here, and about 3 millimeter here. So overall, the panel alignment is as good as what I saw in Lexus ES, and the paint job is also very good. Although this is a basic white, so you don't see too much gloss on it, but orange peel is actually quite good too. But overall, body finish on this Camry, first class. I'm surprised by how good it is. All right, let's take a look at maybe a couple more cars over here. I'm gonna skip through a few here and over to Corolla Cross, and maybe the crown that I have to take off. So this is a Corolla Cross built in a new Mississippi factory, which is called the Mazda Toyota Manufacturing. It's a brand new factory, and Corolla Cross is being built there. Now, some of the earlier Corolla Cross I saw, I wasn't too happy with the quality, but this one looks better. So the gap is about 3.1. It almost lines up here, a little bit off, but actually not too bad at all. And between the door, alignment is good, just the gap is a bit wider. You can tell how much wider this is compared to the Camry we just saw. And also a little bit off. This side is a bit higher than that side. So I don't know. I think it's better than the earlier model I saw. This one is actually almost perfect. And over here, also gap is a bit too wide for me, but alignment is not bad. The back here, the alignment looks good. So overall, the body finish is still needing a little bit of improvement, but definitely better than the earlier Corolla Cross that I audited before. But the paint job is actually pretty good. It's got good gloss, really consistent, good metallic finish, and clear coat seems to be well applied. And actually, there's not much orange peel, less on this one than other Toyota models I've just audited. So the body finish is actually not bad, especially for something that doesn't cost too much. Now let's take a look at the crown. This is the built in Japan crown that is, making a bit of a controversy now because not everyone likes the design, but it is an important halo model for Toyota as it replaces not just the Avalon, but becomes the head of the Toyota brand because of the crown recognition. This is built in a couple places in Japan, Motomachi factory in the earlier days, and I believe it moved over to Takaoka or Tsumi plant right now. But this quality is always been quite good on the crown, but this one's a little bit off. Once again, this looks a little bit sunken in compared to this side. This one might be a pre-production model. I'm not sure. This is a final production unit. Probably not. But the gap here is excellent, and they put a little filler in there for sound deadening, which they don't always do. Also here, almost perfect alignment, and the gap here also looks fantastic. So the hood is a little bit off, but maybe it's an adjustment of the hood. Perhaps for a show car, sometimes they're playing with lighting and also with the wiring, and this might have gone out of adjustment. But perfect paint job as well. This candy red, excellent gloss, less orange peel than the North American built one. Very uniform, very consistent, and the gap here looks good. So really well built on the crown. No surprise there because it's built in Japan. Now let's do a final check on the new Prius and see how the quality is on this one. I've done a little bit of a quality check before when I saw it in the LA Auto Show, but this one appears to be a non-prototype version, and this is also built in Japan. So you can tell the gap is even better than the crown actually, about 3 millimeter. And this one doesn't quite line up, but it's not too bad. And but here, this is the most impressive. This gap is, I think it's almost like 2.9, and then goes all the way to here. So it's absolutely excellent. And then the quality here is also good. I mean, look at that. It's perfect alignment for an affordable small car like this. This is astonishing quality. Also excellent here. No really problem with alignment, and the gap is very narrow at about 2.9 millimeter and also about 2.8 millimeter here. So the overall quality of this paint job also absolutely fantastic. Just look at the gloss, the consistency, and lack of orange peel. Wow, this thing looks like as well built as many of the Lexus models, and actually better than many other cars here that's costing more. So astonishing quality on this Prius. You know what? I know a lot of people don't buy the Prius anymore. It kind of lost its edge, but fantastic design, beautiful quality. And for the money, I think it's actually worth every penny. Built in Japan, perfect quality. Let's do a final check on BZ4X or BZ4X. Also built in Motomachi factory at a special factory called a Zero Factory. And I haven't seen one since my last drive. So they've gotten smarter now because this whole thing is one piece. So there's less areas where you can have problem because the actual gaps are only from here to here. So this is much smaller, easier to align, but perfect alignment. The gap is about 3.5 millimeter, but this one lines up perfectly. And between the front fender and the front door also really good. And also almost perfect here, about 3 millimeter here, and also about 3 millimeter. Surprisingly, the Prius seems to be actually better made than the BZ4X in terms of the panel fit and in terms of alignment and the gap. But the paint job looks really good on this BZ4X. Beautiful paint. Again, not too much orange peel, a little bit here, but not too bad. Good gloss, very good metallic paint. And the gaps are actually very consistent with other Japan built cars, but for some reason, the Prius seems to be exceptionally good. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the BZ or BZ4X in terms of quality, but I'm surprised that the cheaper Prius is better built. I've done a full audit on the Grand Highlander, so take a look at that. In that video, I go through the whole car, outside and inside, and checks for quality of the panels and alignment and paint job, and you'll see what I mean by amazing quality coming out of this pre-production or prototype model from Indiana. So that's one of the best built cars. So that's it for Toyota. Unfortunately, I don't have time to do any more. I was gonna go around all the other brands and do a quality check here in Toronto. I'll have to find another time to do that, but I hope you like my video. If you do, please give me a thumbs up and make some comments. And if you can subscribe, that would be truly appreciated. And I'm really happy to be here at the Toronto Auto Show. But for now, I'm signing off and see you very soon. Thank you so much for watching.